Ted, my husband, bought these boots for me years ago. Goodness knew they are. I still clean them the way he showed me, scrubbing off all the dirt, drying the laces, covering them with plenty of dubbing. Look at them. They're spotless. That's why they've lasted so long. One weekend, not long after we first met, he suggested we went for a hike together. I thought he was mad, so did all my friends. You see, I'd always been a bit of a party girl, never been out walking in my life. I was young, he was good looking, and I knew they were all secretly envious. So I dug out some slacks and a pair of really nice flat shoes and agreed to go with him. They were ruined, of course, the shoes, but he knew so much about nature, and the sun was shining and he looked, well, enough to say I was smitten. So ignoring the derision of my friends, I threw the shoes away and I kept him. I soon lost touch with my friends who didn't find hiking at all enjoyable, and eventually, well, I suppose it was inevitable, I moved in with him. And years later, we were still walking together, so we decided to get married. We even spent our honeymoon walking our way round Scotland. Breathtaking. As we got older, my love of the outdoors for him never diminished. In fact, if anything, it grew stronger. And even now, I still have all the gear: corduroy trousers, anorak, woolen socks, hat, gloves, the lot. Over the years, we built up quite a variety of routes, and what we often did was drive into the countryside, park the car and go for a hike. When we got back, we'd have a meal at the local pub. Nothing quite like a day's hiking to build up your appetite. One of our favourite hikes had two routes, both picturesque, and both with lots of seabirds to watch. I know it sounds boring, but if you've never been bird watching, especially at the coast, it's fascinating to watch how skillfully the birds take advantage of the air currents and build their nests on the narrowest of shelves. The longest route involved a particular walk, which meant parking at the river mouth and then walking along a rarely trodden path up to the cliffs, which took hours. So, if we were short of time, we'd park the car at a nearby village and take the much quicker and easier route to the cliffs. There was a wonderful old inn there that served real ale and fantastic lunches. After one of their meals, neither of us felt like moving, so if we'd taken the long route, we'd toss a coin to see which one of us had to walk back to the river mouth with a car. But even so, we never tired of it. Our life together was never dull. Ted was always dreaming up things to do. I don't suppose many people would agree with me, but I really did discover it's the simple things in life that make you happy. For instance, one rainy day when we were walking side by side with our heads down against the wind, he shouted, "Let's race to that tree," and off he went in his heavy boots across the sodden ground. But before I could set off after him, he tripped in a rabbit hole, threw out his arms to save himself and stuck his hand right into a cow pat. It was really splodgy and splashed up in the air all over his face. He looked so stupid, and we laughed so much I thought I was going to wet myself. It probably doesn't sound funny to you, but to me it was as good as a tonic. Racing each other became a sort of ritual, with the loser buying lunch. He didn't always win, in fact I often beat him. He was never a bad loser, just a lovely, easygoing man with a wonderful sense of humour. It's true he had his faults, but to me he was just perfect. We never had children, but we refused to dwell on it, and it never made any difference to our relationship. In fact, in a funny sort of way, it brought us closer together. It may sound very selfish, but without a family to raise, we had more of everything left over for ourselves, especially money. One year, for his birthday, I hired a cottage in a small village set deep amongst the Yorkshire Dales. What a romantic weekend that was. Then, when it was my birthday, I punched him playfully on his arms. He stopped me from seeing what he'd hidden behind his back. "I'll give you 3 guesses," he said. "A jet plane," I answered playfully. "Or maybe a double-decker bus," I laughed, adding, "I know what it is. It's tickets for 2 to Venice." He looked hurt. "You want to go to Venice?" he asked. I had no idea. "Don't be stupid. I don't care where we go," I answered, "as long as it's with you." He brought his hand from behind his back and handed me an envelope. I opened it. It was 2 airline tickets, but not to Venice, to Iceland, to see the Aurora Borealis. Perfect, I said, and kissed him. 4 glorious days, reindeer rides, skiing, partying, singing and laughing and making love among firs in an ice house. I'll never forget it. Such happy days. One day I left the car at the river mouth and took the long walk to the cliffs. And there I was, on my own, gazing out over the sea, watching the birds and feeling the sea breeze blowing through my hair. I was wearing my boots, of course, and my hardy anorak. I had my book of birds in case I saw any unrecognisable ones, and round my neck hung Ted's powerful binoculars. He didn't need reference books, he knew every kind of bird and used to point them out to me and get excited when he spotted something rare, like the day he saw old squaw. It must have strayed to our shores and we were lucky to see it, but he was a font of knowledge, taught me all I know, and warned me that indigenous Americans found the word squaw insulting, and it should be called by its proper name, the long-tailed duck. It was so peaceful on my own, with only the sound of the sea and the call of the gulls, no traffic, no people. Hello, a voice from behind me. I'd spoken too soon. Wind's a bit chilly. An elderly gentleman with his wife, fellow ramblers in cagoles and woolen caps with socks rolled down over their boots, smiled across at me. I raised my hand, smiled a greeting, and then, after wishing me good day, I watched them walk away and disappear over the brow of the hill. And there's no one, not another living soul, just me and my thoughts. I remember that day. The sun was shining. Ted was pottering round in the garden as usual. I went to the French doors. You haven't forgotten about the gutters, I called. His hearing wasn't what it used to be, but he insisted there was nothing wrong. I called again, Ted, and then even louder, Ted. He trundled from behind the greenhouse with a wheelbarrow. I heard you, he said. I'll see to it when I've finished shifting the compost. Should I ring Sid, I asked. Sid's a local handyman who does odd jobs for cash. No, I told you, I'll see to it. It's been overflowing for weeks, I reminded him. And I told you I've been waiting for a fine day. I'm planning to do it in a minute. I told him I didn't like him going up ladders. He asked why. I said, you're too bloody old. We both laughed. He told me he'd see what needed doing first, and then I could ring Sid. Isn't it time for coffee and biscuits, he said. So I went in and made coffee, cut 2 slices of cake and carried them back out into the garden. As I put the tray on the table, I saw the end of the ladder, half hidden by the corner of the house, lying on the pathway. Ted, I called, coffee's made. When he didn't reply, I walked down the path to see where the deaf old bugger was, but I found him lying on his side in a pool of blood. Ted, I knelt down beside him. Ted! He looked up at me and whispered, stop fussing, Dan, I guess. I ran inside, dialed 999 and grabbed a blanket and a cushion. I slid the cushion carefully under his head and covered him with the blanket and waited. It seemed an eternity before they arrived, examined him, strapped him up and loaded him onto the stretcher. In the hospital, I was advised to sit in the waiting room. All I could do was pace up and down. 4 hours later, they made me sit down and told me the damage to his head was far worse than they first thought. I felt they were preparing me for the worst. These remind me of that first summer again. And he's sitting here beside me. I can feel his hand reach for mine as we watched the antics of the gulls fighting over nesting places. It was there, under the hot sun among the warm, long grass where we first lay together. The thought of living without him filled me with dread. I walked forward to the edge of the cliff, looking down. I watched as my spotless boot knocked little stones into the void. They seemed to hover, almost endlessly, before plummeting onto the rocks below. I take another step, and my toe dislodges a tuft of grass that clings for dear life onto the sandy soil, and then a metal crutch appears from nowhere and hooks me back from the edge. I recognise the smell and feel the warmth. You must have run, he complains as he leans one crutch against his body so that he can unwind his binoculars from round my neck. I had no chance of beating you. Not on crutches, you cheated. Nonsense, I punch him playfully on his arm. You took the shortcut, and yet I still beat you, I laugh. You're getting old after all. And we sit side by side like we've always done, happy in each other's company. Despite being told he'd never walk again, he still insists on going for hikes. One day, he vows, he'll walk normally again. Why not? After all, he got his speech back despite their insistence he wouldn't, and the damage to his brain hasn't diminished his appetite for life. Suddenly, he hands me the binoculars. Look, old squaw! And sure enough, there she is, that rare old visitor, swooping gracefully across the sky. Long-tailed duck, I correct him. You remembered, he laughs. Suddenly, he grabs his crutches and levers himself to his feet. Enough, he says. Let's go and eat. And he sets off across the grass, swinging his legs and the crutches in turn as if he were a teenager. Race you back, he calls, and I have to run to catch up with him. I link his arm. Slow down, I insist. You're not yet fully recovered. All right, he moans, and I laugh. You do realise that I won the race, and so you have to pay for lunch, I gloat. I know, he replies, but do you realise that when we've eaten, you'll have to walk back to get the car?